Hey everybody, welcome to HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com and another installment of Questions and Coffee with David. This is where I get up bright and early in the morning and get my day started and drink my good old cup of coffee, and I answer all the questions that you guys are sending in on pretty much a daily basis. So we're going to do that this week. We're going to do 4 questions in this segment. If you like what you see in this video, please hit that subscribe button below. It helps me out tremendously. Also, go out to facebook.com/HomeRecordingMadeEasy and follow me there, as I'm always posting content on Facebook that's really not part of YouTube. And for more tips, tricks, concepts, and training around everything home recording, mixing, and mastering, be sure to head out to HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com and check out the Quick Mix series along with the Made Easy series. They will absolutely help you bring your mixes to the next level, I promise you. So now let's get ready and let's take a look at question number 1. Okay, question number 1 comes from Robert, and Robert writes in, "Hey Dave, I don't use multi-track drums because I like going for that lo-fi drum sound. Example, gritty rock blues. I use drum libraries that have loops and broken into sections. Can you explain a good mixing strategy for mixing drum loops so all the sections of the kit stand out? If you could reply or cover this topic in your next Coffee and Questions video, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, your longtime subscriber, Robert." Well, Robert, yes, thanks again for writing in. And here we are, Coffees and Questions, and I'm going to answer that for you today. So the thing about drum loops that's important, I feel, to make drums sound like they stand out and really kind of make them sound natural, is to make sure when you're putting your loops together that you're putting them together in a way where you're trying to keep things simple. The one thing I notice about people that use drum loops or things like EZdrummer, where they don't have the parts already written out and they try to write their own drum parts, is they make them way too busy. There's way too many drum fills. The timing between maybe, say, the verse sections and a drum fill at the end of the verse, for example, isn't always nice and tight and in the pocket. It's kind of all over the place. And a lot of times it sounds like they're doing drum acrobatics where a real normal drummer wouldn't necessarily do that. So the thing about keeping drums or getting drums to kind of stand out is really kind of, I think of it in the opposite way. I kind of think about drums using loops and even software drums and MIDI to try to keep it simple so it kind of doesn't stand out so much, so it doesn't sound unnatural. That's super important. So when you're piecing together your drum loops, try to keep things simple. Try to keep things, always thinking in mind like a drummer. Would a real drummer play this in this particular section of the song? And the number one thing that I see that ends up making that stand out to where you notice that it isn't real drums, it really is loops or it's MIDI drums, are the drum fills. They're normally all over the place and there's usually too many of them. The other thing you can think about too is from different sections of the song. So whatever the drum groove is, let's say in verse 1, when you get to verse 2, you may want to change up that groove a little bit so it's not exactly the same as what happened in groove or the first verse in the first groove, because again, a real drummer is going to change it up just a little bit. So having that little bit of variation, keeping the drum fills simple and keeping the overall performance as simple as you can will normally kind of mask it in a way so people don't realize that it's not real drums and it'll sound natural. Now, as far as processing goes, depending on what loops you're using and where you're getting them from, if you're getting real high quality loops, a lot of times you don't need any processing. They've already been processed in the studio. But one of the things that I like to do usually when I'm using software drums is I like to run them through, maybe through a little bit of compression, just a tiny bit, a little bit of EQ maybe, and maybe sometimes like a little bit of an exciter type of a plugin, something like the VCC by Slate Digital or something like Revival by Slate Digital, where it gives it a little more excitement, a little more punch to the drums. So that's kind of how I would handle loops, and if you follow those guidelines, you'll have a drum track that sounds natural, that doesn't poke out of the mix too much and make it obvious that they're not a real drummer playing in your song. So I hope that answers your question, Robert. Now let's get on to question number 2. Okay, question number 2 comes from my friend Fabian, and he writes in and asks, "Hi David, recently bought PreSonus Studio One Made Easy 2-pack and I have a few questions. What brand do you recommend for a decent microphone stand? Also, how can you import MP3 files to your computer to Studio One 3? I don't know if you show that in your other videos." And then the third part of the question is there any other program for drums besides EZdrummer 2? Is there any drum sounds in Studio One that I can use? Thank you for everything, and I really enjoy your videos, Fabian. Well, thank you, Fabian, for writing in. So you kind of have a three-part question. So as far as a decent microphone stand, well, it really depends on your budget. You could spend as little as $20 on a microphone stand, and you can spend as much as $200 or $300 on a microphone stand. If you have the budget, the microphone stand that I recommend to anybody, but it's a little on the pricey side, I'll be totally honest, is Triad Orbit. If you go out to Triad, Orbit.com, you'll see their full line of microphone stands. Or if you go to sweetwater.com and search for Triad Orbit, they carry all their microphone stands as well. And I also did a fairly lengthy review on my YouTube channel about a year ago. You can go to the archives and check those out. Those are super heavy duty, super adjustable. The last microphone stand you'll ever have to buy. They are made of high quality. They're not cheap, flimsy stands. And if you're going to be putting fairly expensive microphones on your microphone stands, I don't recommend you go out and buy a $20 microphone stand from a big box store, because you will easily or could easily brush into them, knock them over, and all that stuff, and damage your prized microphone. So I would check out Triad Orbit. But again, they're expensive. You're going to spend over $100, $120 just to get a standard stand, and that isn't even with a boom arm. You're probably going to spend about $150. If that is a little out of your budget, then I would go again to your big box store, and Sam Ash Guitar Center, one of those places. And there's plenty of stands there. Just beware, they're not going to be made nearly as good as a Triad Orbit stand. So that's my recommendation, Triad Orbit. As far as importing MP3s into Studio One 3, yes, you can easily do that. I'm sure I've showed that in many of my videos, especially my Made Easy and Quick Mix products. You just go over to the browser on the right-hand side of the screen and go and look for the location of where your MP3 files are, and you just simply left click and drag them into Studio One. It's that easy. I think you can also go up to the file menu, and there's probably an import option to import them as well. I believe. I don't have Studio One in front of me, but I believe that's the case. So you should be able to do that as long as you're using Studio One Professional. Now, if you're using Studio One Artist, I don't believe, or Studio One Prime, I don't believe you can import MP3s. That's not one of the features in the Artist version, but just double check that on the PreSonus website. I know you cannot export to MP3s, so I don't believe you can use MP3s anywhere in the session if you're using Studio One Artist. However, you can buy the MP3 add-on patch or pack from PreSonus. Just go out to their website, log into your account, and you can figure out there where to do that. But if you're using Studio One Pro, you can absolutely import MP3s or WAV files, just like I explained. And then lastly, when you talk about EZdrummer 2, is there any other drum sounds that come with Studio One 3? Well, again, if you have Studio One 3 Professional, it comes with a whole host of different loops of all different instrumentation, including drums. You can certainly use that. You can also use the VST Impact, which again comes with the Pro version. I'm not sure if that comes with the Artist version. It might, or that's you can use a MIDI controller to get your drum sounds that way. Those come with Studio One, nothing else to buy. But if you really want something that really works well and something that's super simple and is super affordable to create really good realistic drum parts, EZdrummer 2 is my recommendation, or Superior Drummer 2. So those are the answers to your questions, Fabian, and thanks again for writing in, and let's head on to question number 3. Okay, question number 3 comes from Scott, and he has a question about EQ and compression, so let's take a look at what he's writing in. So Scott will ask, "Hi, man, I just watched your video on mixing with stock Studio One plugins, and I am now getting much better sound on my recordings." Well, that's fantastic, Scott. Great job. I'm recording jazz/funk type project, guitar, electric piano, synth bass, drums, and trumpets. And I was wondering if you had any EQ and compression tips for the piano, synth bass, and trumpets. Any tips on where to set things is much appreciated, Scott. Well, thanks again for writing in, Scott. I'm glad that the videos are helping you get better mixes. That's awesome. That's great. It's a great testimonial. Thank you. As far as EQ and compression settings, again, I get this question quite a bit, and I always answer it like this. There are no EQ and compression settings that I can give you for a specific instrument that's just going to work. If you have watched some of my videos, and maybe one that you have not watched yet, and because of your question, I'm going to assume you have not, and I would highly recommend that you go out to Home Recording Made Easy, check out EQ and Compression Made Easy. You can buy them as separate titles, or you can buy them as a 2-pack and save yourself a little bit of money. That will give you a great foundation for how to use EQ effectively, how to use compression effectively, and the differences between stock compressors, stock EQs, third-party compressors, and third-party EQs, or compressors and EQs, yes. So I would recommend you check those out. And after watching those videos, you'll get a sense for how you can figure out how to make those instruments that you mentioned sound their best using EQ and compression. There's really no settings. The only thing I would tell you for the most part with piano and trumpet is make sure you're using high pass filters, get all that low end rumble out of there. Same thing with synth bass, but it depends on how low the frequencies are. But other than that, there's really no settings. You can use some presets if you want in the plugin to try to get you in the right ballpark. But even then, I try to refrain from telling people that because by just knowing settings or knowing presets, you never really understand how to use EQ and compression effectively. And EQ and compression by far is the most important two plugins you will ever use in your mixing engineer toolbox. You have to have a really good grasp of EQ and compression to get your mixes to sound professional. It's as simple as that. Now, whether it's a stock compressor or stock EQ or third-party EQs and compressors, it really doesn't matter. What matters is, do you understand how to use an EQ effectively to go ahead, carve out the bad frequencies, enhance the pleasant frequencies, and get it to sit right in the mix? And the same thing with compression, knowing how to control the dynamics to the right amount to make sure everything sits well in the mix. And again, depending on the mix itself, depending on the instrumentation around the instruments that we're talking about will highly depend on what EQ frequencies you may cut or boost and how you would use a compressor. So unfortunately, I can't give you any settings, but I will give you a piece of advice. Go get EQ and compression made easy. No, I'm not just trying to sell you a product. Those are really two fantastic products to help answer this exact question. So I hope that kind of helps lead you in the right direction, Scott. And again, thanks for writing in. If you have any other questions, you can certainly shoot me another email after you take a look at those products. So now let's head on to our last question for this video, question number 4. Okay, question number 4 came in on YouTube this morning, and I'm going to butcher the name, and I really apologize up front. This comes from, I believe it's pronounced Adhara. I won't even try to pronounce the last name. If I screwed up your name, then I really do apologize. But here's a question that I've gotten a couple of times with something related to this, so this I think will be helpful to people. He writes in, "Hello, I am having a problem. I am not able to run your videos in Studio One simultaneously as the sound goes off once I switch on to Studio One, and the ASIO activates. Also, the sounds in the DAW are not being played. So how can I solve this problem? Please help." Okay, well, it's really difficult without knowing your computer setup. But if you're trying to run, let's say, a video, an MP4 file, let's say in QuickTime or in Windows Media Player if you're using a PC, and running Studio One at the same time, you have to make sure that your sound card, whatever your interface is activated for your computer settings, which will play your video, as well as the same interface or sound card that you're using in Studio One in the preferences window. So it sounds like you just have a setting not quite right there. Again, it's hard for me to answer this without seeing your screen. I can tell you though that playing my videos or any video on your computer and playing Studio One simultaneously back and forth is absolutely doable. I do it all the time. It is absolutely more than likely a setting in your computer that's not quite right. And again, I don't know if you're using PC or Mac. If you could send a little more detail or a screenshot of your settings, I might be able to help you a little bit further. But it's definitely something to do with a setting is my guess. You should be able to play a video, and then you should be able to click over to Studio One, and you should be able to hear Studio One. If something is cutting in and out, or if you can't hear both together, then you have a setting wrong. The other thing I tell people too, if you're trying to watch some of my instructional videos, especially the Made Easy and the Quick Mix products, those are all shot in high definition. They're very large file sizes, and I do that for a reason, because I want it to look good for you, number one, but most importantly, I want it to sound good. So the files are large. I don't compress them way down to give you crappy quality. I try to give you the highest quality as I can. And what I recommend people do when you're watching any of my training products, or even if you're watching a tutorial on YouTube, if possible, watch that tutorial on a separate computer from the one that you're working on and you're trying to in your Studio One session, or an iPad, or a phone if you can. You can always use your phone and plug in an earbud or something like that to hear the audio. But ultimately, if you have a second computer, that would be ideal, because depending on your computer processor, the amount of memory you have, you're trying to run all this stuff at once. It can bog down the computer tremendously, especially if you're using an older computer, or if you're not using something that has a fast processor. So a lot of times I tell people, if you have an iPad or a tablet tablet. You can watch my product on that while you're learning and while you're working along with me. Or again, ideally a laptop or a second computer is ideal. But if you have any more details, just send them in and I'll try to help you through it. But based on what I see here, it just sounds like it's a setting in your computer that's probably the culprit, and maybe that will help you, figure it out a little bit more quickly. But if not, send in another email and I'll try to help you. So that's it for this segment of Questions and Coffee with David. Thanks so much for writing in again. Again, keep sending me these questions. I can do this a couple of times a week if need be. This is a real effective way to answer your questions and to interact with you guys a little bit more, and it helps me get my day started anyway. And again, I really do appreciate you writing in. So again, please hit that subscribe button below. Go out to Facebook and follow me on Facebook. And as always, go out to homerecordingmadeeasy.com. If you want more training on recording, mixing, and mastering, I can guarantee you it'll help you bring your mixes to the next level. And until the next Questions and Coffee segment video, this has been David with homerecordingmadeeasy.com, and I will speak to you guys all soon. Take care.